So it's been a pretty terrible 24 hours for Russia. The EU passed its 19th sanctions package, and the United States just put out sanctions on Russia's two largest oil organizations, Rosneft and Lukoil, and it's pretty bad. But there's also kind of a backdoor to part of this, and I'll show you what that means in just a moment. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. If you're not familiar with me, please watch through to the end. If this is something, if you want to keep abreast of what's going on, please consider subscribing. So let's start here. This is Zelensky meeting with Antonio Costa yesterday. I guess this is this morning, actually. And they're meeting and talking about the 19th sanctions package, and this was really good to hear. Listen to this.
Today in the morning we approved already the 19th package of sanctions targeting shadow fleet, banking and energy sector of Russia. And today in this European Council we will take the political decision to ensure the financial needs of Ukraine for 2026 and 2027, including for acquisition of military equipment.
Okay, so what you heard was 19th sanctions package passed, and then they're also going to make sure that they have the funding, not just for 2025, but 2026 and 2027. That's really good news. Now let's look at this 19th package. So the EU has officially adopted its 19th package. It's a good day for Europe and Ukraine, said the Danish foreign minister. 19th sanctions package against Russia includes a ban on imports of Russian liquefied natural gas starting in January of 2027. Well, okay, so it's 2025 now, but there'll be a full ban in a little over a year. Restrictions on the movement of Russian diplomats within the EU. Well, they used to be able to go wherever they want. Like if I'm in America, I can go from New Jersey to California to Chicago to Texas to Florida, and it's no problem. But diplomats will have to get a pass about where they can go. Sanctions against those individuals in the deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. That's big. I don't know why this isn't the biggest story out there at all. I mean, this should be the leading story. Penalties against another 118 vessels of the Russian shadow fleet. Okay, there's more than that. There are hundreds more that aren't right now incurring these penalties, but okay, it's still progress. New sanctions targeting Russian banks and companies from third countries helping Moscow evade Western restrictions, and over 100 foreign flag tankers carrying Russian oil added to the blacklist. Okay, all good. I have nothing bad to say about what the EU is doing. Last week, UK sanctioned Russia's two largest oil companies that fund Putin's war machine. This is Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. I'm pleased that the U.S. has now joined us with substantial sanctions on the same two oil companies. Putin must pay the price for his needless aggression. The killing must end now. Okay, good. Now, that means that what happened yesterday is the same kind of thing. And here it is, the official from home.treasury.government, U.S. sanctions on Russian oil. They actually did this. See the official Treasury website. This is the actual articles put out by the Treasury Department. And here's Scott Bessent. Here's Scott. Before I go to that, let's do this. U.S. Treasury has imposed sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil. This is important. Rosneft and Lukoil are number one and number two largest as far as the oil refineries or crude oil producers, including 34 of their subsidiaries. Shortly after, U.S. President posted a list of sanctioned Russian oil companies on his social platform. Now, let's look at this again. India is expected to massively cut Russian oil imports after the U.S. sanctioned Russian oil giants Rosneft and Lukoil. India, just last month, just in 1 month, purchased 2.5 billion euros in Russian crude oil. That's just India. Now, if we look at this, we see the EU is buying a little bit. That's the crude oil is in the purple here. Turkey's buying a little bit more, but India and China collectively buy a whole lot of Russian crude oil, and that's really where the action is. Russian oil flows to India could drop to near zero due to new U.S. sanctions. Could, and we'll see how that plays out. There's a kind of a backdoor loophole, and I'll show you what I mean. Bloomberg reports Indian refiners say the latest restrictions on Rosneft and Lukoil make further imports nearly impossible, ending a trade route that has been profitable for both sides for the past 3 years. Okay, here's Anton Gerashenko explaining what happened. So India will significantly reduce its imports of crude oil from Russia. Reliance on industries Reliance Industries Limited, India's largest buyer of Russian oil, plans to sharply reduce or completely halt crude imports from Moscow. India's state-owned oil refineries are reviewing their trade documents for Russian oil to ensure that there is no direct supplies from Rosneft and Lukoil, after both Russian companies were hit with U.S. sanctions. The key distinction with the new sanctions against Russia is the expected shift in India's position, and that could make these sanctions far more difficult for Russia to withstand. So if India bails out because they don't want to get hit with these sanctions or they don't want to be involved in this, then that could be problematic for Russia. Russia will now seek negotiations with India to find new ways around the sanctions, applying pressure and offering lucrative deals. I'm sure that's already in the works, I'm sure. India's reaction is crucial. If things go according to the more favorable scenario for us, Russia's market could face a collapse. However, it's important to understand that sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft are significant but will not have an immediate effect. It's unlikely to bring a swift end to the war. Putin will wait for China's position and engage in talks with India. He's also likely to propose negotiations with the United States as a way to buy time. We've seen that happen a few times already. It's likely to happen yet again. Now, the Chinese are upset about this. China will not abide by sanctions that are not authorized by the UN Security Council, according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Okay, what does that mean? The U.S. can do these sanctions, and the UN can vote up, and it has no real meaning. But I'd remind you that Russia is the head of the UN Security Council this month, and what this is saying is China will not abide by sanctions that they know full well that Russia is going to veto. It doesn't matter if they veto them, they'll still stick. Now, let's look at who's saying what. Let's look at who's for this, who's against this, because it will triangulate and try to understand the whole picture. Mike McFaul is saying progress. He's the former ambassador to Russia from the United States. He's replying to Andrew Yermak, who said the U.S. and EU are tightening the noose on the aggressor's economy. Yesterday marked a key step in holding Russia accountable for its criminal war against Ukraine. Washington and Brussels delivered another series of painful blows to the aggressor's state economy. Here's Lindsey Graham, the senator from Republican senator from South Carolina. I very much appreciate Secretary Bessent hitting Russian oil sector hard with new sanctions because Putin is showing no signs of wanting to end the bloodbath in Ukraine. Ukraine has agreed to President Putin's proposal for an immediate ceasefire on the line of contact. Russia has rejected this proposal by launching a massive attack on Ukraine last night, hitting a kindergarten. The best way to end this war is to dismantle Russia's energy sector, which is virtually the only source of revenue for Putin's war machine. It's the biggest source by far, certainly. Absolutely agreed, said Representative Mike Turner. Absolutely agreed. It's long past time for Congress to approve bipartisan secondary sanctions, and they're working on this kind of thing. They're working on calling Russia a T state because of what they've done with the children. I showed you that yesterday. By the way, if you subscribe, I'll keep you updated on this regularly so that you don't fall behind in understanding what's going on. I applaud today's sanctions, says Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, a critical step in tightening the economic vice on Kremlin's war machine. Mike Pence, Trump's former vice president, no love lost after January 6th, still says strong moves where Donald Trump is posting about Treasury sanctions, major Russian oil companies, calls on Moscow to immediately agree to the ceasefire. Okay, so it looks very favorable from the American position, but I'll show you the nuances that mean that maybe it's not quite what it looks like. Zelensky says that Trump's latest moves on energy sanctions are exactly what Ukraine has been waiting for. So he's favorable about this too. Now, what about the Russians? Hours after the new sanctions were introduced, the Kremlin finally started to say something. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova threatened retaliation for EU sanctions. Quote, the response will be adequate and will take into account Moscow's interest, unquote. And she called it entirely counterproductive step. Okay, here again, Russia claims to be immune to Western sanctions after the U.S. targeted Lukoil and Rosneft. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova called the measures counterproductive, insisted that Russia will continue developing its energy sector with confidence despite the pressure. Okay. And again, Moscow won't face problems from the new EU sanctions. Russia has developed solutions and continues to expand its energy potential. Like this has made a lot of homework for Maria Zakharova. Again, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the news regarding the announced decision by the U.S. Treasury Department to impose restrictive measures against Rosneft and Lukoil. If the U.S. administration follows the playbook of its predecessor, meaning Joe Biden, it will only endanger global economic stability. Okay, I mean, they've got nothing better than that. Spetsnaz 007 is a Russian, pro-Russian X-site saying if there's anything the West should have learned over the years, it's that sanctions will fail against Russia. We've never bent to pressure. Working out the root causes through diplomatic talks is the only path toward peace. Well, of course, that's the same rhetoric as always, but all that to show you that the Russians are just not happy with what happened. Now, here's the actual document from the Treasury Department. Today, I'm just going to read a few highlights, and then I'm going to show you some potential problems with this. Today, the U.S. Department of Treasury, Office of Foreign Assets Control, is imposing further sanctions as a result of Russia's lack of serious commitment to a peace process to end the war in Ukraine. Today's actions increase pressure on Russia's energy sector and degrade the Kremlin's ability to raise revenue. Now is the time to stop the killing and an immediate ceasefire, said Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent. And now here's all the Rosneft and Lukoil subsidiaries that are being affected by them. There's 34 of them, I believe, and there's a large list of all these companies. So they're all being affected. Now, it says down here, violations of U.S. sanctions may, and I'm highlighting the word may, result in the imposition of civil or criminal penalties on U.S. and foreign persons. So it'll affect Americans, certainly, but it may impact other persons. And that's really the key. And I'll show you what I mean by this in just a moment. Sir William Browder said, as one of the biggest proponents of sanctions against Russia, I applaud this move. I'm sure the CEOs of Rosneft and Lukoil are in a state of apoplexy, but this won't seriously deprive Putin of his war dollars unless we sanction the 8 refineries that buy the oil in China, India, and Turkey. So are we doing that? Well, we may be doing that. We're not sure that we're going to do that, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Here's Phillips O'Brien saying a new free piece released. The Trump harsh sanctions on Russia last night were anything but. Take a deep breath. So here's his actual article, and let's go and look through this so we can see what we mean, because it all hangs on may as opposed to shall. Shall, when law says it shall do this, you must do it. When it's may, you may or you may not. The new U.S. sanctions move actually protects Russia for now. Think 4 weeks, not 2. This is Phillips O'Brien, October 23rd, 2025. You would not be mistaken in thinking that last night the Trump administration leveled some very harsh sanctions on Russia. I mean, that was the public rhetoric used by the administration to announce their latest maneuver, and it was a line eagerly taken up by the press, and it shows a few headlines that show that. What if I were to tell you that what actually happened yesterday was that the sanctions were put off for at least the next 4 weeks, and even then no commitment was made to implement them? What would you think? That's the reality. What was sanctioned yesterday was U.S. firms and individuals that deal with 2 large Russian oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, which together handle the flow of about half of Russian oil. Okay, and I showed you the Treasury announcement, and you saw that with your own eyes, and it's sanctioning U.S. persons, definitely, and then may do for others. But here's the U.S. Treasury document. It looks pretty impressive until you get to the small print. These sanctions are not automatically applied to foreign individuals or companies. The word used are may result in and run the risk of being sanctioned. Okay, violations of U.S. sanctions may result in the imposition of civil or criminal penalties on foreign persons. In addition, foreign financial institutions that conduct or facilitate significant transactions or provide any service involving Russia's military-industrial base, including any persons blocked pursuant to EO 14024, run the risk of being sanctioned. Okay. So what this order really does is sanction U.S. companies and individuals that work with Rosneft and Lukoil, and maybe it makes it more difficult for those firms to transact in U.S. dollars. However, the U.S. does almost no business with either Russian firm, so it doesn't really matter what happens there. The real power of such sanctions would be if the U.S. puts secondary sanctions on foreign companies that are buying oil from Rosneft and Lukoil, like in India and in China. Not only are secondary sanctions not mandated in the order, just threatened above, it turns out that the earliest that even the threats could be acted on is 21 November, more than 4 weeks from now. All firms have been given the USG until 21 November to wind down their business dealings with the Russian companies. And what happens on 21 November, you might ask? Well, nothing definite. We really just don't know what'll happen. And that's basically the headline. We don't know what'll happen. So while these Treasury sanctions look pretty impressive, we still, like, you have to suspend your disbelief for now. Okay, I hope that helps you understand things. I'm going to leave you with this little story, or this little commentary, because I think it's right. Every time Trump thinks that he is close to a peace deal with Russia, Putin escalates. It starts another massive shelling of the Ukrainian cities. Yesterday, the Russian army hit a kindergarten in Kharkiv. This pattern repeats over and over again. Every time the world thinks we're close to a peace talks, Russia escalates. The world still doesn't have an understanding of why this is happening. It still finds it unthinkable that Russia does want war, not peace, because the rest of us, we want peace. So we think, of course they want peace. They don't want war. It's hard to imagine this if you're a normal human being, but so far I cannot find other explanations. Again, this is commentary, but I think there's something to it. Clausewitz said that war is a continuation of politics with other means. For Putinist Russia, the reverse logic works. Politics is a continuation of war by other means. The goal is not to win, but to lose less than your enemy. I once called it zoo politics, or negative-sum game, or Sado-Putinism. Putin genuinely thinks that only eternal war will save his population. And the idea is we can take more punishment than you can before we finally grind you down. He genuinely thinks that the war strengthens him and his Russia, and peace will weaken him. In order to stop it, you need to prove to the Russians themselves that this model no longer works. Every time Russia lost a war, a window for change opened up. Every time it won a war, it became more tyrannical. And I think that's a great commentary to help us understand where we are. Now, that leads to where we are in 4 weeks. With the May, will the sanctions actually have the bite? And that's an open question yet. I don't know. But in the meantime, Darth Putin says he's unfriending Trump. Okay, my friends, tell me what you think. Was this informative? If it was, please hit the like button. If you're not a subscriber, hit subscribe. I'll be back for more follow-up on this. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. Thank you to Wolfgang Muller, an undergraduate Patreon patron. And by the way, Patreon board members, the Zoom meeting is not this Saturday, but the following Saturday is our quarterly Zoom meeting. All right? Thank you. Thank you more than anything, folks, for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.